On March 18, 1964, 9-year-old Marise Ann Chiverella vanished while walking to St. Joseph's Parochial School in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. Her body was discovered later that afternoon in a coal mining pit, marking the beginning of a mystery that would remain unsolved for 58 years. In 2022, the breakthrough came when authorities identified the perpetrator, James Paul Forte, through genetic genealogy, a method that had never been used in Pennsylvania for a case this old. Born on May 4, 1954, Marise lived in a modest row house near her school. Hazleton, a small town of about 25,000, was deeply rooted in coal mining and close-knit community ties. Marise's parents, both of Italian descent, raised her in a tight family unit. Known for her kindness and willingness to help others, Marise was well-liked by her classmates and teachers. On the morning of her disappearance, Marise left her home early, carrying canned goods for a classroom donation. This small, thoughtful gesture was typical of her generous nature. She passed familiar landmarks: the bakery where neighbors greeted her, the church steeple she could see from her street, and the school she loved, but never made it to school that day. At some point, James Paul Forte, a man who lived just 6 blocks away, approached her on a quiet street. Hours later, a man giving driving lessons discovered Marise's lifeless body in the pit. While the town mourned her loss, authorities struggled for decades to find answers. The case remained cold until 2022, when genetic testing finally led to Forte's identification, closing a chapter that had remained open for nearly 6 decades. In 1964, Hazleton was a small, working-class town known for its rows of stone and brick homes, coal-dusted air, and the steady rhythm of miners' footsteps at shift change. The town was built around its industrial roots, but its residents, many of them working-class families, found comfort in a strong sense of community. Marise's family lived on South Chestnut Street, just a block from St. Joseph's Church and School, which were central to the town's daily life. Every school day, Marise's routine was simple and filled with love. She woke early to help her mother prepare breakfast, a bowl of oatmeal and warm milk, before donning her school uniform, a navy blue dress and a crisp white blouse. With a small note and canned goods for her teacher tucked into her satchel, she was ready to begin her walk to school. The morning air in Hazleton was a mixture of coal smoke and the first signs of spring, a scent that would soon be forever associated with this tragic day. Marise would wave to neighbors as she passed the local bakery, exchanging smiles with familiar faces. The men's club at the church would greet her with warm, friendly words, and shopkeepers would tip their hats as she passed by. This was a town where everyone knew each other, and children's walks to school were a natural part of daily life. Marise's walk to school took her past the familiar sights of the town: the railroad crossing where conductors' whistles echoed, the quiet strip mine that had been turned into a grassy meadow, and finally, the red brick school she attended. But that morning, by 9 a.m., Marise was nowhere to be found. Her absence didn't go unnoticed for long, and soon, panic began to set in. By the afternoon of March 18, 1964, the search for Marise Chiverella had intensified. The town was already on edge, and authorities had begun combing the streets and surrounding areas. At around 2 p.m., a driving instructor and his 16-year-old nephew were near the old coal mining pit off South Wyoming Street when they made a chilling discovery. Initially, they mistook the small form lying motionless in the pit for a large doll, but upon closer inspection, they realized it was the body of a child. The pit, once an active coal shaft, had long since been abandoned and overgrown. The ground around the area sloped steeply, covered in tall grasses and scattered coal remnants, making the discovery all the more eerie. Police were quickly alerted, and within minutes, officers arrived on the scene. The area was cordoned off, and crime scene investigators began their meticulous work. Marise's body was found in a state of undress, her skirt askew, and her school uniform stained. Her satchel, still open, lay nearby with the canned goods she had carried spilled out onto the ground. Crime scene technicians noted that there were no footprints in the damp soil surrounding the pit, suggesting that the perpetrator had likely carried Marise into the area. Broken twigs and crushed grass led from the pit's edge, but no signs of an abandoned vehicle or discarded weapon were found nearby. The isolation of the crime scene, far from main roads and seldom visited by locals, suggested that this had been a premeditated act. As officers examined the area, they collected fibers and strands of hair from the scene. Despite the careful documentation, there were no immediate leads. The town's worst fears had been confirmed, but the investigation was just beginning, and the path to justice would be long and uncertain. Following the discovery of Marise's body, the next critical step in the investigation was the autopsy, conducted in Hazleton's small medical examiner's suite. The pathologists, working under stark fluorescent lights, immediately confirmed Marise's identity using her dental chart and school uniform. The external examination revealed multiple bruises around her neck, consistent with manual strangulation. Additionally, linear abrasions on her wrists and forearms indicated she had attempted to defend herself. Her school dress was carefully cut away, and forensic experts documented signs of sexual assault. Seminal fluid and tissue samples were collected for future analysis. Internal examination revealed hemorrhaging in the cervical tissues, further confirming the cause of death as asphyxiation. Marise's physical measurements: height just over 4 feet tall and weight consistent with school records, showed no signs of malnutrition or illness. Toxicology reports ruled out sedatives or alcohol, indicating no drugs were involved in the attack. A small abrasion on her cheek suggested that Marise might have been struck during the assault, a painful but likely initial act of aggression. Standard histology slides were prepared, though 1960s-era technology offered limited cellular detail. No surgical scars or prior hospital stays were found, providing a clean medical history. The time of death was estimated using body temperature and rigor mortis, which placed her death between 8 o'clock and 10 a.m., shortly after she was last seen walking to school. The soil embedded under her fingernails was preserved for analysis, though no clear mineral match could be found. Biological samples were sealed in glass vials, awaiting future testing, while the findings from the autopsy confirmed the grim reality. Marise had been violently assaulted and strangled, narrowing the investigation's focus to finding the perpetrator. Within days of Marise's murder, the Hazleton Police Department assembled a task force led by Detective Sergeant Robert Miller. The investigation quickly expanded beyond the local force, with officers canvassing the town and distributing flyers bearing Marise's description and photo. The community, in shock, rallied to assist, offering any information that might help solve the case. The flyers promised a reward for any leads that could break the case open. Officers interviewed more than 200 people, classmates, neighbors, coal yard workers, and tavern regulars, focusing on any adult male seen near the coal pit that morning. A tip about a dark sedan seen around the area led to multiple stakeouts at the town's garage, but no vehicles matched the description. Detectives also examined school attendance logs to confirm the time Marise had left home, cross-checking trolley and bus schedules for potential witnesses. Yet, each lead seemed to circle back with little progress. Forensic evidence, such as hair and fibers found at the scene, was sent to the state laboratory for analysis. However, the results proved inconclusive, offering only generic matches for the fibers. As the investigation continued, suspicion briefly fell on a man recently paroled for an unrelated offense. He was known to have been in the area that morning, but his alibi was confirmed, and the case against him quickly collapsed. As the weeks turned into months, the investigation faced growing obstacles. With no solid leads and the lack of modern forensic technology, the task force relied heavily on oral testimony, which, over time, dwindled. By mid-1964, as tips slowed, the case was officially marked cold. Despite this, the file remained open, and the search for Marise's killer persisted, even as the investigation gradually faded into the background. Marise's murder deeply impacted the Hazleton community, leaving an indelible mark on its residents. The tragedy was unlike anything the town had ever experienced. Hazleton, known for its close-knit, small-town atmosphere, found itself struggling with a grief that permeated every corner. The local newspaper, the Standard Speaker, ran daily updates and, as the years passed, continued to revisit the case on anniversaries. The community was determined to never forget Marise and to keep the search for justice alive. At St. Joseph's Parochial School, Marise's classmates, devastated by the loss of their friend, wrote letters to her family and held prayer services in her memory. Parents, fearing for the safety of their own children, no longer allowed them to walk alone. In response, neighborhood volunteers formed walking safety circles to ensure that children could still walk to school without fear. A roadside memorial was established at the site of the coal pit where Marise's body was found. The shrine, adorned with bouquets, candles, and canned goods, symbolizing the donations she had been carrying, became a regular fixture, tended by church groups each year. Over time, the memorial grew, with wildflowers overtaking the site. Despite the passing years, Hazleton never allowed Marise to be forgotten. By the 1970s, annual vigils were held at the site, including interfaith services that brought together various religious groups. In the 1980s, local historians published pamphlets recounting the case, reminding new generations of Hazleton's past. Despite the media's waning interest after the 1990s, community theater productions and local podcasts kept Marise's story alive. Even decades later, Hazleton's youth learned of her story through school assemblies that focused on victim awareness. This ongoing remembrance kept the case in the minds of new generations, pressuring future detectives to revisit it. In 2018, after decades of stalled progress, Hazleton authorities partnered with Parabon NanoLabs, a company specializing in advanced DNA technology, to reanalyze the evidence collected from Marise's case. Seminal fluid samples from Marise's clothing, which had been preserved since the crime, were subjected to next-generation sequencing. This cutting-edge technique revealed a partial DNA profile of the perpetrator, offering a crucial lead that had previously been unavailable. In 2019, Parabon took the significant step of uploading the DNA profile to public genealogy databases. This marked a pioneering move in cold case investigations in Pennsylvania, shifting the focus away from traditional criminal databases. Instead, investigators could now search through millions of publicly submitted family trees. The breakthrough came when a distant relative of the suspect was identified, a genetic match that opened new doors for the investigation. The process was far from straightforward. Genealogists, including 18-year-old Eric Schubert from Elizabethtown College, took on the monumental task of tracing the familial connections. Schubert's expertise in genetic genealogy allowed him to construct a family tree from the DNA match, meticulously narrowing down the list of possible suspects. His work uncovered multiple distant relatives, some of whom lived across the country. Investigators then engaged with these family members, obtaining voluntary DNA samples that further narrowed the search. Through this approach, investigators focused on males born between 1941 and 1943, whose family lines aligned geographically and age-wise. This strategy led to the identification of James Paul Forte, a man who had lived just 6 blocks from Marise. His connection to the crime remained unknown until the use of genetic genealogy, an innovative method that transformed a once hopeless case into a breakthrough. On February 12, 2022, nearly 58 years after Marise Chiverella's murder, authorities formally identified her killer, James Paul Forte, a 22-year-old bartender and bar supply salesman from Hazleton. Forte, who had lived just 6 blocks away from Marise, had no known connection to her or her family. His identification came through genetic genealogy, a method that linked him to the crime after years of investigation. Forte, who had died in 1980 from a heart attack at the age of 38, was exhumed to provide a definitive DNA sample. Authorities obtained bone and tooth samples, which were then compared to the DNA profile collected from the crime scene in 1964. The test results confirmed that Forte was indeed the perpetrator. This confirmation marked the first time in Pennsylvania's history that a cold case of this nature was solved using genetic genealogy. Discover the chilling true crime stories that shook the world, with deep dives into unsolved mysteries and groundbreaking investigations. Join us for gripping tales and justice served after decades waiting.